All Indiana Politics
is your premier source for Indiana politics.
Focusing on issues that matter to you.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage, exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders, expert analysis on critical legislation. From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
It's Sunday morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. Both houses of Congress are floating measures to pay air traffic controllers during the government shutdown. Members of Indiana's delegation back those measures, but they're not sure if they'll go through. Our government reporter Garrett Berquist talked to both Senator Jim Banks and Congressman Carson about the proposals. Both men serve on intelligence or armed forces-related committees. We also asked them about the Gaza ceasefire and new airstrikes on suspected drug smuggling boats.
Let's bring in Senator Jim Banks. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you.
I want to begin with the ongoing federal government shutdown. Have there been any further negotiations over the healthcare subsidies question? Will the government reopen anytime soon?
Well, I hope so. I mean, at this point, we voted on this over a dozen times, and we're 55 votes. We need 60 votes to reopen the government. Keep in mind that the House passed the spending bill 5 or 6 weeks ago. So this is really up to 5 more Democrats in the Senate joining a few Democrats who are already voting for it and saying enough is enough. Let's reopen the government. We can talk about healthcare subsidies and how we fix Obamacare and healthcare through the regular process in the Senate. But this isn't a partisan spending bill. The spending bill that we have on the table right now is what Democrats voted for back in March. It's not a Republican or Democrat spending bill. It's just continuing to spend at the levels that we've spent before for a short period of time to give us more time to negotiate and discuss the healthcare issues or any other issue that Democrats want to raise.
One of your Senate colleagues, Jerry Moran of Kansas, has a bill to pay air traffic controllers. Both Congressman Carson and Jefferson Shreve are sponsoring similar legislation in the House. Would you support that specific piece?
For sure. And in fact, yesterday or earlier this week, we had a bill on the floor in the Senate just to pay the troops as the shutdown goes on, just pay the troops, fund the military. And all the Democrats voted against that as well, except for a couple. So based on that, if a spending bill did come to the floor to pay air traffic controllers or TSA agents or Homeland Security officials who are protecting the border, if the Democrats are going to vote against paying the troops in a standalone bill, I imagine that that's their posture moving forward.
I want to turn to the Gaza ceasefire. Hamas recently violated the terms of that ceasefire, but it's generally holding for now. How confident are you that that ceasefire will hold?
Well, Vice President Vance is coming home from Israel right now, where he met with officials there to try to keep this deal on the tracks. It appears that some of the Hamas terrorists who violated the deal might have been acting on their own. I don't know all of the details, but we got to keep the deal in place, bring peace to Gaza. At the end of the day, Hamas can never be in political control of Gaza, and that's a part of the deal. If they don't disarm themselves, then they will be disarmed, and America will stand with Israel to do whatever it takes to keep Israel safe and protect themselves, and that's all part of the deal. So we got to keep the deal on the tracks, and with that aid flowing into Gaza, rebuild Gaza, that's a part of the agreement too. But Hamas has to keep up their end of the deal, and whether these few terrorists were acting on their own or not, they should be held accountable for it.
I also want to address the recent airstrikes on alleged drug smuggling boats in the open ocean. Should President Trump seek congressional authorization for that?
President Trump has the authorization that he needs to protect the homeland, and that's what he's doing. The U.S. Navy is moving about 15 to 20% of our Navy fleet to the Caribbean to help stop drugs that are being smuggled into our country. As you know, I mean, fentanyl is the leading cause of death of Americans of working age in our country. And even though we've largely secured the border, you have these drug cartels, narco terrorists, Venezuela, Colombia, South America, Central America, that are flooding our country with more drugs. And President Trump Article 2 gives President Trump, the commander-in-chief, the authority that he needs to protect the homeland. And that's what he's doing. There's nothing more America first than keeping America safe. And drugs flooding into our country and killing Americans is as far as I'm concerned, an act of war. And we should retaliate, as President Trump is doing, by sinking these drug boats and submarines and other vehicles that are being used to flood America with more drugs.
Let's bring in Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. What an honor.
You're co-sponsoring a bill to pay the FAA, including air traffic controllers. How would this work?
I've been in constant communication with industry leaders, and they've told me this is already a very stressful job. Working without pay only adds to that stress. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. So I introduced a bill to protect essential aviation functions, including air traffic controller pay, even during a shutdown. The Speaker of the House could absolutely reconvene the House for a legislative session and ensure employees don't have to miss a paycheck, but he won't. In fact, he hasn't called the House for a vote since September 19th. It's been over a month. So my bill would effectively allow the FAA to continue operating, including ensuring employees work with pay by drawing from its Airport and Airways Trust Fund during any lapse in typical government appropriations.
Would this be a temporary fix, or would this be permanent for any future shutdowns?
Well, permanent for any future shutdowns, immediately it would be certainly a fix and a greater push as conversations are brewing, even in the midst of proposals to introduce a stopgap measure. There are folks on the other side of the aisle, both in the House and Senate, slowly coming over to the idea of paying federal employees during a shutdown. Our own staff, our own team, hard workers, they come to work every day with a sense of mission and purpose to serve Hoosiers and Americans. They aren't being paid.
How concerned are you we'll see large-scale sick-outs among air traffic controllers like we did during the 2018-2019 shutdown?
Oh, that's an important question. You know, the shutdown, as you remember, back then and now, a shutdown in general has the potential to impact general functionality and aviation safety. That's why this bill is so important. A shutdown now, even in the future, it shouldn't even impact airport safety. Indianapolis is home to the best airport in North America. Aviation is essential to our military. It's essential to our economy. Certainly it's essential to medical care and so much more. So I don't think that aviation safety should be impacted because of a shutdown that is politically based.
While I have you on the line, I want to briefly turn to international affairs. We've already seen Hamas violate the terms of the ceasefire in Gaza. Will this deal hold, and what will it take to keep it?
I'm hoping that we can rein in on overreach from extremist elements. I'm hoping that we can rein in excess from the Israeli government. And my hope is that we can uphold the terms of the agreement and establish a Palestinian state that is rooted in self-determination and an ability to care for its citizenry, to thrive, and to live securely.
I also want to address the strikes on suspected drug trafficking boats in the open ocean. Should Congress be the body to authorize this? And are you satisfied from what you've seen in intelligence briefings that those boats are in fact engaged in drug smuggling?
Well, what I'll say is this. We always want to make sure when there is a targeted strike that we're hitting the right mark. What I can say is that the drug epidemic has had a huge impact on our country, particularly our state, particularly our communities, particularly the neighborhood I was raised in during the crack cocaine epidemic. So something has to be done. I think that we have to work with our global partners in the global South to ensure that we are reining in these cartels and criminal enterprises. What I don't want to do is to use this as a political talking point where there isn't any substantive change of moving the mark, as it were. And so throughout that, our partners in the global South must also be held accountable to make sure they're weeding out corrupt elements in their administration, and they aren't in the pockets of these cartels who continue to push narcotics through our states. Now, with the growing threat of China working in cooperation.
All right, coming up, Indiana Senate Republicans say they don't have the votes to support redistricting. Why that's not necessarily the last word. Welcome back. Senate Republicans say the votes aren't there for redrawing Indiana's congressional districts, ahead of next year's midterms. This despite 2 visits from the vice president and a phone call with President Donald Trump. But as Kat Sandoval reports, that doesn't necessarily mean the conversation is over.
This comes after months of debate of whether Indiana would join several states in their pursuit of redrawing their political maps. Usually it's done every 10 years after the census. But the Trump administration is pushing for redistricting mid-decade. House Minority Leader Phil Giaquinta is not surprised that the state Republicans do not have enough votes.
Legislators, both Republican and Democrat, I believe that our votes reflect the will of our constituents. And Hoosiers are an independent bunch. And we're not going to take orders from Washington, D.C. We're going to listen to what our constituents have to say.
Republican Senator Liz Brown was the first senator to publicly support redistricting. On social media, she calls on Governor Braun to call us into session and let's get this done. On X, Governor Braun said he is still having positive conversations and that he is confident State House Republicans will come around. There is no set deadline for the special session, but Braun says they have until mid to late November, which could give Republicans enough time to change their minds. I asked Giaquinta if he is worried about senators flipping.
I can never predict the outcome in the legislature. No one ever can. But all I can tell you is what my constituents have told me and what others are saying is we have more important things to do, and let's work on those things.
Vice President J.D. Vance visited Indiana at least 3 times to specifically discuss redistricting. So far, Texas, Missouri, and North Carolina approved reshaping their districts to favor Republican seats. On the other hand, Democrat-led California may also push to redistrict to counter those Republican seats. I'm Kat Sandoval for Wish TV, wishtv.com.
All right, coming up, Indiana's Best Political Team analyzes the latest redistricting news and the approach funding deadline for food assistance programs. All right, welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in 2 members of Indiana's Best Political Team, Republican Allie Bartlett and Democrat Dana Black. Good to see you both.
Good to be back. To see
Lots to get to today. Yeah. So let's start with these big developments on the redistricting debate, okay? So Senate Republicans come back, they say, hey, listen, we don't have the votes to call a special session. Allie, we'll start with you right now. How likely is it that this is the last time we hear about this?
I definitely don't think that this is the last time that we're going to hear about this. I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion, especially as we see more blue states now coming up, like Virginia in the last couple of days, saying we're going to take this on. This really comes down to, at this point, fairness and making sure that the Hoosier voices in Washington, D.C. are not drowned out. We've seen Democratic states gerrymander for years, and if you look at their congressional maps, you will see it. Go look at Illinois. I'm telling you, it looks a lot different than Indiana's. And at this point in this discussion, it's responsive for us to undertake redistricting. It's responsive to these blue states that are coming up and saying that we're going to do this for political reasons. We have to make sure that Indiana and our Hoosier voices are represented in D.C. accurately.
Okay, Dana, I'll let you get in. Also, though, quickly, I'll let you respond to her, but also, what does it say that we have several holdouts now in the Senate?
So first, I agree with Allie that it is not going to be the last time we hear this discussion because we see now that Indiana Republicans don't actually work for the people that voted for them. They work for the president in the United States right now. They don't serve the people because all of this started because Trump went to Texas and said, Texas, go get me 5 more votes. Yeah. And so this snowballing effect is because they can't actually run on the policies that they are implementing. So they gotta rig the system a little bit because if you run on what they've actually produced over this past year, people are going to be hurting. Like literally the government is shut down. And if you recall, Donald Trump said when the government is shut down, it is on the president.
We'll get to the government shutdown here in a moment. I'll let you respond. The good thing about my seat is I'm able to see your reaction and the camera's that on you. Go ahead, respond.
Yeah, and what I have to say to that is that we have seen Democratic states doing this for years. We have heard Gavin Newsom say that they have done this for years. J.B. Pritzker, all these people, and now we're seeing it when Virginia came out and said, we are a Democratic state and we're going to get you 3 more seats in Congress. I don't know how at this point red states don't respond and have our voices heard as well. We have to make sure that there's accurate representation. That's our constitutional duty, and we have a duty to Hoosiers to make sure that we're represented in Washington, D.C., just like the blue states.
So accurate representation says 40% of the electorate in Indiana are Democrats. So the fact that you're saying that 40% of the electorate in Indiana shouldn't have a voice in Washington, D.C., that's not representation.
I have one. I got to go back on that for sure.
40%.
Now, let's talk about the 6 states that make up New England.
I'm talking about Indiana.
The 6 states that make up, and we're talking about the fact that this comes from Democratic states. The 6 states that make up New England, over 40%, they vote Republican, and they have zero Republican representation in Congress. Zero.
If Texas had
they have zero representation in Congress out of 40% voting Republican.
Quickly though, let me jump in here real quick. What about when they talk about mixing urban and rural? I mean, does that make sense? Voting rights groups and communities say, listen, this doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense because they can't run on their policy. So let's just rig the system. And oh, by the way, black people, you don't get a vote in Indiana. We're not going to send you anywhere because if you get rid of Andre Carson's seat, we make up a significant population in Marion County. We are 30%. And you're trying to say that black people, this is what Republicans are saying, black people, you do not get a voice in D.C.
Go ahead, Allie.
Let's take a look. I'd say 2 things. I wish right now that we could pull up the congressional maps in Illinois, which is a perfect example.
Why are you talking about Illinois?
Because it's a perfect example.
She has to leave the state, y'all.
No. I'm going to tie it back to Indiana and your point about Marion County. Illinois' maps are a perfect example because Illinois is a state that has very different pockets of representation from rural to urban. And if you take a look at their maps and how they look and then take a look at Indiana's and even the maps that are proposed for redistricting, ours are completely evenly spaced geographically. Illinois' maps are gerrymandered completely, and that's what we're talking about here. So let's talk about something like Marion County. The south side of Marion County is very, very different than Center Township. So absolutely, when we're talking about Marion County being one congressional district, that goes exactly to your point. That goes exactly to your point.
The south side of Marion County is in District 6.
But if we take the time to really look at our representation, this is what we're talking about.
A
if other states are looking
is
at
not
it, it's
fair
our
representation, and you know it. 9-0 is not fair representation.
We're running out of time. I want to jump in on the government shutdown real quick, okay? Because I know you guys want to talk about this as well. I want to get your takes, and then I'll dive in a little bit with some questions. Go ahead.
So the government shutdown, okay, I understand Republicans want to say that it is the Democratic fault and they have to go find 5 votes. Well, they knew they needed 60 votes before they started. So why didn't they begin the negotiations and having good conversations to find out what it takes to get Democrats to vote for it? What they tried to do was like they did with that big ugly bill. They was just going to shove it down people's throat and thought that they were going to capitulate to the King Orange like everybody else does, right? They thought that the Democrats were going to succumb. They were going to threaten harm to American citizens, and Democrats were not going to stand pat because the bottom line is that bill eliminated subsidies to lower the cost of health care. They should have began those conversations early, and because they didn't, this is where we are.
Well, let's talk about the food aid situation here, though. Yeah, because these benefits are about to run out, Allie. So I'll get your thoughts on that quickly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the food aid and all the other benefits that are about to run out are a perfect example of why it's completely irresponsible for the Democrats to be perpetuating this shutdown. Look, the proposal that we have, the CR that is in front of Democrats to vote on right now, is stuff that they have already voted on before. So to answer Dana's question about why was this not thought through beforehand, because Democrats had already voted on these policies. This is not new. They chose to do this for political reasons right now, and now the American people are going to suffer because of it, because we have programs like SNAP and WIC that are going to run out. And let me just say, to directly answer your question on those programs, in the past week alone, we've put forth legislation that would continue to pay our troops. Now we're talking about air traffic control, in which Congressman Carson was even a sponsor on. the Democrats are voting against those too. So what are our options when it comes to extending those programs? I don't know, because Democrats will likely vote them down.
You have about 45 seconds left.
They voted on those bills before the big ugly bill that gutted health care.
Okay.
There are going to be millions of Americans whose prices and costs for health care are going to go through the roof. They knew that. And so these people would rather give Argentina $40 billion than to make sure that they take care of Americans. They have got farmers that are going to be losing their farms because of the subsidies that they used to have for USAA and SNAP benefits, because the government would buy the food from the farmers. Now they're not going to do that. So, this government, Republicans can't govern.
Well, we'll leave it there. Regardless of who's at fault, and both sides can point fingers all they want, but stuck in the middle of the American people.
The American
Something
people.
needs to get done.
Yes.
All right, good to see you both. Spirited discussion as
Love
always.
it.
They are
Love
friends,
it.
by the way. Which I always love having you guys on. Thank you so much. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics this week. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. Also, be sure to check out the All Indiana Politics podcast online at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your week.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.